Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, along with Judge Janine Pirro, Piers Morgan, Jesse Waters, and Brian Kilmeade. It's 5 o'clock in New York City, and this is The Five. Fox News alert, the massive manhunt underway in Maine. Authorities still desperately searching for Robert Card. He's the suspect believed to have shot and killed 18 people in Maine and injuring 13 others. Dozens of FBI agents aiding local and state officials in their ongoing search, and residents continue to shelter in place in multiple counties. Nate Foy live on the scene in Lewiston, Maine. Nate, what is the latest on the search for Card?
Well, Dana, 22 hours into this manhunt, authorities are still spread out across multiple counties trying to find the man who they say is responsible for the worst mass shooting in Maine's history. Right now, there is a scattered presence, but one specific place that we're watching is where Card lives in Bowdoin, Maine. Take a live look at this. This is 25 miles east of where we are in Lewiston, and 25 miles farther east on the coast, Dana, the U.S. Coast Guard confirms that it's following up on a possible sighting in Boothbay Harbor. They're using aviation units there, and the town over from this camera near Card's home is called Lisbon. Take a look at this. That's where Card's vehicle was found near a boat landing. Where he is right now is anyone's guess. There's no defined search perimeter. There's a shelter-in-place order that stretches across multiple counties. Card is accused, you mentioned, of murdering 18 people at 2 different locations and injuring 13 people. Those 2 locations were a bowling alley and a bar. 3 of the 13 injured are still in critical condition. Now, Card is a trained firearm instructor. He's a member of the Army Reserve, and he has documented mental health issues. All that has people in this area very scared of what he might do next.
I slept on and off for about 2-3 hours. Moving forward, how do we move forward? Feeling as a community, we're numb, we're hurt, we're, like how can you feel safe again? How can we send our kids to school?
Yeah, Dana, right now Lewiston is a ghost town. Pretty much every single business is closed. The only people that you see out are members of the media as well as law enforcement. We do have a press conference coming up with Senator Susan Collins at 6 o'clock, so we'll see what she has to say. But right now, everyone is just hoping for good news. We'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Nate. And Jesse, you have a lot of ties to Maine. It's a state that you know well and an area that you visited.
Yeah, we have a house right north of Boothbay Harbor where there was just a sighting, we believe, of this gentleman. Shouldn't call him a gentleman, but this individual. And there's a lot of patriots there, a lot of heavily armed patriots there that are going to be well protected and that are going to call police immediately if they see something suspicious. We now have the Coast Guard involved. But, Dana, if you elongate the coast of Maine, it's basically the entire length of the United States. And where this guy is in Livingston, which is a little, I guess, inland, you could say, there are rivers that feed right out into the water. And it's densely forested. And so this terrain is wretched. It's easy to hide in. And he may have had a cabin somewhere. And he has an ATV. He probably has a canoe. This guy looks like he planned it. So he could be north, he could be south, he could be stashed away. We don't know where he is. But I'm a little concerned about this. I don't like the fact if someone's involuntarily committed to a mental institution and no one initiates the process to take away his firearms. That is insane to me. And whoever didn't initiate that process to take this guy's firearms away has blood on their hands. And we don't know a lot about what's going on right now, but that right there is your patriotic duty. If you're sending someone to a mental institution for 2 weeks because they're saying they're hearing voices and because they're going to shoot up an army base, they have to make that known to the right authorities so they strip this guy of his weapon so everybody can be safe.
Judge, what about either that law or what do you think the police in terms of the coordination that is going on right now to try to find him?
First of all, this is a guy who is trained to avoid capture, all right? 90% of Maine is forest. So this guy is one step ahead of law enforcement, and there's a huge problem. The drones and infrared technology will be, they'll have a problem because of all of the forestry, the trees, and everything else. So, I mean, the layout of this situation is a bad one to begin with. But what we have here is apparently a process where the U.S. military has no obligation to report to law enforcement that there is a problem, whether it is a mental health issue with a soldier or an Army reservist, as this guy was. So it's not unlike with the priest years ago. They said, well, we handle it within the church. We don't have an obligation to report to civil authorities. Apparently, the Department of Defense does not require the Army or anyone else to report to local law enforcement when there's a problem. And that's where the slip up. There was a real slip up here. My understanding, according to a well-placed U.S. Army official, is he was assigned to the Army Reserve Unit, sent for training at West Point this July to support summer training. But there are no records that he participated in the training. Apparently, on the first day of training at West Point, they wouldn't say why, but he was removed, although open source reporting suggests erratic behavior. So then he goes into this mental health part of the hospital. I think it's called the Carter or Keller Army Hospital on the West Point base. And there's very little that's done after that. So there was a slip up there that did not have to happen. There's another piece that I think is important here, and that is that we made a decision in the 70s, and maybe even before that, that we were going to start shutting down these mental health institutions because a lot of them were abusive. There were people there that were mistreated. And instead of upgrading mental health institutions, we literally unloaded people who were mentally unfit onto the streets. And we are now suffering the results of that.
Here's Morgan. You're here with perhaps a view on gun control in the United States, but also you come from a country that doesn't have a lot of gun violence and other kind of violence because violent people will commit these types of things. And one question before you talk about anything you want to talk about. Does Britain allow for the involuntary institutionalization of people if they have mental health problems like this?
I think you can be voluntarily or involuntarily put into a mental institution, absolutely. I mean, what I would say generally, look, first of all, my heart goes out to all these families because once again, you're seeing similar imagery of a shooter with one of these semi-automatic rifles, and a lot of lives have been lost, a lot of people's lives have been ruined, and families are grieving and mourning, and it's heartbreaking. Secondly, as I learned the hard way, over the years, Americans don't really take to my accent or somebody called Piers lecturing them about how to lead their lives or about their culture or about their laws. I get that. But you made a point there that in England, we just don't have guns. I mean, hardly anybody has guns, including criminals, right? So I think we've had one mass shooting in like 5 years or something. You've had God knows how many this year alone, and it just goes on. It's kind of Groundhog Day. And there's the old, I don't think actually Einstein ever said this quote about the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. But actually, in this case, I would argue, as a friend to Americans, someone that loves the country and loves the people, at some point, you've got to do something more than you're doing. And I wouldn't use the word control. I think that's part of the problem with this whole debate. When Americans hear the word control, they think instinctively federal government control, and it alienates any chance of any compromise. Gun safety is the way this should be debated. How do you make it safer? How do you stop these loopholes, these guys slipping through the net? I mean, it's obviously a catastrophic failure. In Maine, they have yellow flags, not red flags. Why? Why don't you just have a red flag system all over the country? You have 400 million plus guns in circulation. 1 million new guns are sold every month in America. This problem's going to get worse, not better. And at some point, as your friend, as the great ally, I simply say, you've got to do something more to stop this. You can't keep having the Groundhog Day of these people with these semi-automatic rifles going into civilian areas and gunning people to pieces. Can you?
As your friend.
Yeah.
Respectfully.
Of course.
We have these guns because of you. Because of your country.
I know.
Because of your king.
I know.
And we haven't had that problem with the king since then.
I know.
With respect, as your friend.
Respectfully, here's my response. I cannot buy in the United States of America a Kinder Surprise chocolate egg. They're banned. They're banned on safety grounds because the little toys inside them might choke people. A British Prime Minister, I won't say which one, but one in the last few years, told me he was stopped at LAX because he had some for his nieces and they confiscated them because they were a health hazard. Now, I simply say, you're a country of many freedoms and many regulations. How about regulating guns in the way that you do Kinder Surprise chocolate eggs?
Okay. With respect, do forks make people fat?
Yeah.
Okay. No.
Well, they do. They do, don't they?
Guns don't kill people.
They do.
People kill people.
Guns also
Forks
kill people.
don't make you fat, Piers.
Guns do kill people.
Forks don't make you fat.
Want to jump in, Brian?
Yeah, a couple of things. Just on this in particular, his family spoke out. They were asking him to surrender. NBC's reporting that there was a note found. They don't know what the note says. They haven't said anything yet. They do know that he has registered a watercraft. So this guy could have planned an escape. He seems very organized. It looks like he's got a personal attachment to both these places. He wasn't just randomly shooting it up. You see pictures of him on Facebook. He's bowling in the past. I look forward to some of these people coming forward. I do see that somebody who served with him 10 of his first 20 years said he was a commander that was always calm, great to be with. They felt like they grew up with each other, so something clearly went wrong. And about our system, this guy's going to get a gun regardless. This guy's a military guy, knows how to get him. And all these experts, and I'm not a gun expert or a rifle expert. I'd never taken anyone down or hunted someone down or took out a deer. But the way he handles the gun, the way he moved, they say he is absolute pro. And turns out he's an instructor. He was going to get a gun anyway. But there was a system in place to stop him. He was institutionalized, just like the same system in place that says after 10 days, you are now cured from your addiction. Well, what happens is your insurance runs out, and all of a sudden they go, okay, you're still an alcoholic, but we only have 10 days for you to stay here because we need your bed. You're out of here. So this guy was stopped. He was hearing voices. He was rounded up. And they did take, the problem is when he got out, they did not take his guns away. There's something with that because with that shooter, that should happen
Brian,
with the red
flag. Can I just jump in because there is some breaking news that we have. There is apparently David Spunt, I think, is with us from DOJ. We have Fox Digital is on the ground there. Apparently, there's some loud bangs. And David Spunt, are you there? No, you're not there. Okay. So he is saying that there might be some action here, guys. So we are going to keep a close eye on
You know that's
this.
where his house is, too, right?
Yes. And so we will try to get David Spunt and more information for you.
But if I can respond to what was just being said, they have a yellow flag law in Maine. The yellow flag law in Maine, different from a red flag law, requires law enforcement to detain the individual, get a medical professional to come in and say he's a danger to himself or others. Now, if the Army doesn't tell law enforcement that there's a problem, law enforcement isn't going to find the medical person to detain him and to find out and to then enter him into a program. 2 weeks is never enough for anything in terms of getting someone better.
Yeah. So, Judge, I would say this. Somebody put him in there. So was it the military that put him in there?
Military put him in there. That's an Army-based hospital.
But the difference between the flag system, as I understand it, is with yellow flags, families can't notify a judge directly, right? And that's in a red flag, they can.
Yeah.
So in this case, his family knew he was severely mentally disturbed. They knew he owned guns. They knew that he had publicly threatened to commit a mass shooting.
Just like Nashville, by the way.
And this is, by the way, all in the last 3 months. Right? I mean, I'm not sure how many more flags this guy had to raise, but because the system didn't allow for his family to go directly to a judge, as it would under a red flag system. So I simply say, why not make red flag system mandatory?
The family can go to law enforcement. There is that they have the freedom to do that in every state, as long as law enforcement then gets a medical professional who assesses him and says he's a danger to himself or others.
In a red flag system, it's the judge that makes that calculation.
Yeah. But the cop I was the judge who made that calculation.
I know.
But the cop has to bring me the person. And in order to get that person, you need law enforcement to bring him in.
So, Dana, you're still following what David Spunt's saying, right? Which basically he might have heard something. There might have been a bang. And
so what you're seeing right now is new video that is just in. The FBI and local police, of course, they are outside the last known address. There is a loud bang. Apparently, the FBI is trying to make contact as they believe that Robert Card may be inside. That is the reporting that we are getting from David Spunt. He is our correspondent at the Justice Department. We're trying to get him up with us here in a moment. We have Fox News Digital on the ground there reporting as well. So we're going to keep talking about this here because there's obviously plenty going on.
That
Go
would
ahead.
surprise me, knowing what we know about this guy and how well trained he is, that he would go back to his last
house.
address after murdering a slew of people in the middle of a manhunt.
Running out of his car with him, leaving his door wide open.
That doesn't seem like something he would do. Either he's a total insane person and he would go back home. Some people go back home after shooting people and put some chicken in the oven. But something tells me this is not him. I could be wrong, but this would be the last place you would go during a manhunt.
Although his family did say, I think it was his sister, said that he was having these episode periods, really bad mental health episodes, and then he would be perfectly normal. And she felt that when he was, if he could get back to a place of normality after this, he would feel so bad at what he'd done.
But that's
he
not
would
enough.
then do something.
That's not enough. The fact that if he is in his home, that shows that he is not connected to reality. Because anyone who has done that would know that I have to abscond, I have to get away. So whenever, for example, I had an insanity defense as a prosecutor, that's great. He was crazy when he killed a woman, but then he knew to get away, get a gun, get a boat, take a ride. You know, this may show that he's more insane than we think.
There was
Can I
also
ask something?
Yeah.
I mean, you're Americans, right? It's your country.
Pretty much.
These are happening on your watch. Out of interest, I mean, how do you feel about this incessant volume of really catastrophic mass shootings? What do you think should be done?
Well, I actually just purchased my first firearms last week. And it was a big moment for me as an American. I'd never done it before. I grew up in Philadelphia. We weren't a family that came from guns. My father grew up in Hartford, Connecticut. It wasn't something that we did, but now we're out in the country. And if you have a young family, Piers, and you're out in the middle of the woods,
I get it.
You can't call 911 and just hope for the best.
I get it.
You have to defend your family.
Yeah.
And so everybody thinks that way, especially in a place like Maine.
Yeah.
As we said, talk about densely populated, it is more densely forested in Maine than Alaska.
Wow, I
So
didn't know
you make
that.
a phone call if someone's at your door or on your premises, you're waiting maybe sometimes 15, 20 minutes for police to show up. That is valuable time if you're trying to defend your family, your children, or your property. You need a weapon, and maybe you need an AR-15 because you have to have something semi-automatic and you have to have something accurate that you can handle well in a tight spot.
So my question is, I get that, and I remember Bill Maher arguing the same, that he bought a firearm because he thought he had to be able to defend himself in a country where a lot of people have guns. I get it. We don't have them in England.
Netanyahu just told everyone in Israel to get a gun.
Right. So I completely understand why people in America feel the need to arm themselves to defend themselves and their family. That's not my question. My question is the volume of these mass shootings is increasing. The volume of guns being sold each month is massively increasing. Mental health problems seem to be increasing. Over-medication seems to be increasing. It's a lethal cocktail that's getting worse, not better. You're smart people. I just wonder, what does America do about this?
What America has to do is we have to start making sure that people who get guns are not mentally unfit to have them. There are HIPAA laws in the United States that prevent a lot of this information from being garnered. But the truth is, Piers, we are so far down the road where in Chicago, every guy's got an illegal gun.
Yeah.
Every criminal does, that we have to get guns to protect ourselves.
My son is here. He was at Chicago University last year, and a couple of students were shot while he was there. I mean, Chicago is an absolute basket.
nightmare.
To build on what you're saying, and to build on what your point is, it's a mental illness issue because we did not have this problem until the last 15, 20 years. Columbine was really the first. We always had guns. We had more guns. We had less regulation than we had right now. I didn't grow up in a gun culture, but I appreciate that it's one of our rights, and I'm not looking to give it away. And what happens is when you crack down on regulation, because we all have the same objective, to never have this happen again.
Yeah.
When you crack down on regulation, you just stop the people like us that would buy a gun and abide the laws. We're going to get the permits. We're going to go to the range. We're going to get the training. We will make sure it's in a lockbox. We're not the problem. But more regulations clamp down so we continue to change our lives if the gun is in your culture and your choice, while the reckless lunatics like this guy will continue to shed the laws.
So I get that completely. I completely understand that logic, and it makes perfect sense. Right? I get it. But what do you do then? What can you do to stop this ever-increasing volume of real massacres? Because they are increasing in size, scale, death toll.
But this guy would have been caught had the Army notified law enforcement. You know, it was like 9/11 when what the CIA wasn't talking to the FBI. You know, now they're talking to each other. Now you have to have the Army notify local authorities. All right, that's one legislative change right off the bat. And we've got to make it easier, as you say, to make sure that we can bring people before judges who are a danger to themselves or others. There are a lot of people who are not well. We saw it during the pandemic. They're walking around on the streets, stabbing people, shooting people.
Even though we have a lot of people that are very pro-Second Amendment in this country, over 60 to 70% are concerned about this.
Yes.
Right.
As Republicans and Democrats.
Let me grab David Spunt now, who I've been looking for. He's our phone a friend here today. David Spunt has more details about what's happening right now in Maine. Hi, David.
Hi, Dana. Hi, everyone. So we're told right now that they are at a couple of properties that are associated with Robert Card, the suspect. And a source just told me over the phone that these are likely flashbangs. This is standard procedure to try to see if he is inside, to make comment or to make contact, rather, to have him come out and come into custody. I asked whether or not they would have obviously looked at these homes earlier today, because these addresses have been known to law enforcement and actually known to members of the public and members of the media by just doing a simple Google search earlier today. And yes, they have been at the homes earlier, but for some reason now they are using flashbangs. I was told not to read into anything specifically, meaning that he's going to walk out or he's necessarily inside. But it's always been a concern, Dana, and everyone, that this man, Robert Card, has had a scanner or several police scanners and is clearly listening potentially to every move that law enforcement is making. So just kind of to wrap it up, this is in Bowdoin, Maine. There are several locations in Bowdoin where properties, rather, that are connected to Robert Card, the suspect, no longer person of interest, the suspect. And we are hearing flashbangs at this point, and we'll continue to update. And this is coming from one of our Fox Digital crews on the scene.
David Spunt, thanks for rushing to the studio for us. We appreciate that. We will continue to monitor breaking details on the manhunt for the Maine shooter.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.